Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Professor Tom Jackson from Loughborough University. This afternoon, we're going to find out more about the Pathfinder initiative, and I'm joined by Professor John Beckford. Good afternoon, John. Welcome to this interview. To start with, John, let's hear more about you. Who are you? What have you been up to in recent years?
So I'm a researcher, educator, consultant, even author on the 3 books on management. I'm also a trustee of the Under 17 Car Club Charitable Trust and company director of the organisation that runs Pathfinder. We've 2 visiting professorships, and I'm also president of the Cybernetics Society, which is, of course, about adaptation and learning in organisations.
Wow, you sound like you're a very busy chap. So, John, tell me more about the Under 17 Car Club Charitable Trust. What's it all about? Why did you set it up?
Well, I didn't set it up. The organisation was actually established first in 1976 as a club for young people to learn about driving, and something like 5,000 young people have gone through it over that period of time. But in 2012, we decided as a sort of leadership group that whilst it was good fun, there was an awful lot of benefit to be had from a road safety point of view. So we transformed ourselves into a charity, and we currently run something like 7 Pathfinder events a year. That's about 35 days, plus something like 30 or 35 car club days, which are still the original club activity, but all with road safety in mind. Everything we do is done by volunteers and delivered and managed that way. Then no employees at all. And underpinning that is our belief that we have a responsibility to help young drivers be safer on the road, very simply.
So in real terms then, John, what does that mean? Is it like anyone under 17, like 16-year-olds can come to you and try and get some safety skills on how to be a better driver on the road when they're 17? Talk me through it.
Yeah, so for young people, learning to drive is a bit of a rite of passage. For our young people, we're giving them the privilege of being able to drive on private roads, away from the public, etc., so they don't need licenses, before the age of 17. And because we can get to them at that stage, they are more likely to want to listen, because they're driving as a privilege rather than as a right. And actually, they're quite malleable at that point in terms of their ability to absorb information and understand the world very differently comes in. So we created the Pathfinder initiative, which is basically a structured 5-day program. The intention being that we synthesize, and this is messy, this bit, there's a complex conversation between technical skill, between safe attitudes, and between, let's call it, risk-reducing driving. So the way they bring the technical skill together with attitudes, together with their thoughtfulness, is what drives their development of safe drivers. So it's about behaviour, it's about attitude, it's about observation as much as anything else, seeing the world around them, seeing the risks that present, and understanding how they should manage them.
So bring that to life for me, John. I mean, it all sounds very complex. You get to the track or wherever you go, a 16-year-old rocks up. What does that week look like to them?
Oh, gosh. It's quite complicated. It is complicated, but really, it's like most practical skills in life. On day 1, we simply need them to be able to get the car moving, started, stopped, and parked safely. And their first evaluation, if you like, is the ability to reverse park as if they were in Sainsbury's car park. It kind of almost doesn't matter that they're learning to drive. What matters is they're learning to understand and manage their world in a different way. They happen to be doing it in a car. And we're interested in this sort of structure that says it's a young driver, it's a parent, and a parent is important to this, and it's a skilled volunteer instructor. So we're bringing these 3 parties together in a conversation in the car, which is partly about making the essence of making the car move and stop. And once we've done that, we can move them on to being able to park it properly, and then we teach them to overtake, we teach them to avoid accidents. So in the middle of the week, we run an exercise called Break and Avoid, and the idea of that is that most of us have accidents because we fixate on the problem. What we're doing is we're teaching young people to think about the escape route, the safe route, the way of not having the accident. So we teach them a technique for working with that. So early part of the week is basically getting the car moving. Second day, we have a conversation with them. There are no lectures. We have a conversation with them about the causes of accidents. So they typically speed and observation are the two most typical things. And we teach them how long it takes a vehicle to stop, because people don't realise. And so we give them a braking demonstration, a variety of vehicles at different speeds. So everything from maybe a van to a police car, and from 30 miles an hour to 70 miles an hour, and understanding how the distance elongates massively. So they understand then about keeping themselves safe is about actually making sure they've got the space around them. We give them a theory test every day as well to make sure they develop their understanding of the rules of the road. On the middle day, we talk to them about the consequences of accidents. And this isn't the bent metal and the broken plastic or even the dead bodies. It's about the emotional consequences for the families involved. So when somebody has an accident and there's a death or there's a serious life-changing injury, how does the mother feel? How do the parents feel? What about the poor policeman who has to, who has to do the death knock, who has to knock on the door and tell a set of parents that they've lost a child? So we actually work with them, but again, it's a conversation. It's about understanding and getting them to articulate how they're feeling when they think about those sort of situations. And of course, most young people have somebody in their family or in their wider group of network who has had that accident or has been in that accident, been affected by that. So it gets very, very personal, and it can get quite tearful at times. But the point is to make them own, to create the circumstances which they own the emotional outcome. And that's the thing that will then inform their behaviour as a driver when they eventually get on the road. On the next day, we're interested in practical mitigation. So things will still go wrong. So there are two other things that we need to do. One is to teach them what I said earlier, brake and avoid, how to avoid the accident in the first place. And on top of that, there's what we call behavioural mitigation, helping them to understand how to manage the emotions in the vehicle, the behaviour of themselves and their peer group, in order to reduce the, if you like, the poor behaviour that often happens in cars. That they are all familiar with mobile phones, with looking at Facebook while they're driving, and all that sort of stupid stuff that young people do. So we teach a technique called assertiveness, and the idea behind assertiveness is a particular technique for you as the leader of a conversation, getting people to do the things you want them to do in a calm and rational manner. So you reduce the emotional overload that often happens in teenage conversations. So, if you like, it teaches them to be really effective, stroppy teenagers. When we've got all that, the thing that then backs it all up is lots and lots of practice. Hours behind the wheel, things that are difficult on Monday have to become almost habitual by Thursday and Friday. So everything that happens below the dashboard, moving the levers, pulling the steering wheel, operating the switches, all becomes automatic for them. They don't have to look for controls anymore. They're now able to then drive, what we call drive the environment, to drive to see what's happening outside the car and adapt what they're doing with the car to the behaviour of the drivers around them.
It sounds very involved, John. So for me, if as a parent or if I've got my children under 17, why is this needed? What's the selling point here, John? Will parents turn around or kids turn around and say, well, do you know what, John? Doesn't the driving instructor do that when he takes me out? So why is your program needed?
An A&E doctor said to me once many years ago, the tree always wins. And that's a reference to, if you watch the news regularly, young drivers commonly crash between midnight and 2 a.m. on a Saturday on a country road, usually when it's slightly damp or slightly cold and the car's slightly overloaded. And they do all the wrong things, and as a consequence, the car goes off the road and there's always a tree in the way, and the tree is always stronger than the car. There have been many changes in DVSA tuition and testing process over many years, but they haven't significantly affected the DVSA test pass rate, which still hovers in the mid-40s. And there's an argument that we present that says, well, we should evaluate ADIs not by the test pass rate, but by the survival rate of their young drivers in their first year on the road. Because bluntly, that's probably the most important thing in terms of a lifetime of driving. fundamentally, the KSA rates, that's killed and seriously injured, amongst novice drivers are disproportionate to the number of licence holders. So they have about 17% of accidents, but they're only about 9% of licences, which is quite scary. The government is proposing some changes. They haven't yet come forward. But they won't actually address the problem. They'll defer it. So graduated driving licence actually can drive the wrong behaviours. So like black boxes for telematics, there have been cases of young people dying because they're rushing to get home before their 11 o'clock curfew, for example, or driving in a particular way which keeps the black box happy, but actually is the fundamentally wrong way to handle the car on the road, because the sophistication of the telematics is not particularly great. And graduated driving licence, of course, is really hard to enforce because there are very few traffic policemen and many young people driving. It will also make it difficult for people to work shift works, to work at night, etc., which many young people do. All of the things that are being talked about so far are symptom-focused rather than problem-focused. They nibble away at the edge without actually addressing the fundamental cause, which is that we don't teach people the right things when we teach them to drive. So it's not inadequate education, it's not inadequate young people, it's the way we teach them that's the problem. We can teach an 18-year-old to drive a tank, to drive one of Her Majesty's big grey warships, to fly a fast jet. Surely we can teach them to drive a car. The DVSA teaches people to drive in a low-speed, urban-focused environment. But when young people get on the road, what are they doing? They're in higher speed limits, they're on rural roads, an environment for which they haven't been educated. Consequently, it will go wrong. They have no real comprehension of the impact of speed or weight on the dynamics of the vehicle and the way that it moves around. So we teach all those things, or attempt to, in the best way we can, in a very constrained environment.
So it sounds like a nice jolly 5 days out, and I guess parents and children will be asking themselves, what's the evidence? How does it work? You have these lovely 5 days out. What will be the benefits that you evidence over the years, John?
We've been conducting surveys now since 2006 was the first, that's 14 years ago, covering students on Pathfinder and the Car Club going back to the late 1990s. And over that time, we've consistently seen that their accident rate in their first year on the road is currently 1 in 20 versus a national norm of about 1 in 4.5, 1 in 5, according to DFT statistics. So although it's a small survey, there's consistency over a long period of time, which suggests that the methodology works. It teaches people different things, and as a result, there's a reduction in their accident rate. And in fact, we used this recently to present evidence to the House of Commons Select Transport Committee inquiry into young and novice drivers. And I'd say it was very well received at that point.
John, thanks very much for your time. But before I let you go, just one question. At what age can someone come on to your Pathfinder initiative?
Pathfinder starts at 15, typically. We make our own rules, so sometimes we'll take the odd 14-year-old. But it's 15 to 17. We're trying to get to young people before they go on the road. If they're even younger than that, they can join the Under-17 Car Club when they're 11 and start as a club activity in the same way other kids play football or hockey. They can come along and they can learn to drive with us from the age of 11. Pathfinder is 15 plus, and it is, it is intensive, it is hard work, but it's also an enormous amount of fun. And if young people are having fun, generally speaking, they're learning a lot at the same time.
I think I'll get my daughter signed up to this amazing initiative, John. Still a few years off that, but I'll certainly do that. John, thanks very much for your time today. Great interview, and I hope everyone enjoys this podcast.
Thank you, Tom.